All right, let's dive into one of the most mysterious and misunderstood origin stories of all time. We're going to unpack the biblical account of Satan's rise and fall, and it's not the story of a monster. It's actually something far more complex, and honestly, a lot more tragic than you might think, all detailed in a fascinating prophecy from Ezekiel chapter 28.
You know, when you hear the name Satan, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For most of us, it's that classic image, right? A red, horned creature with a pitchfork. It's a caricature that's been built up for centuries. But that popular image, it's a world away from what the source material actually describes.
The Bible paints this incredible picture of a being who is the absolute pinnacle of creation. He was literally the blueprint for perfection in wisdom and beauty. So that leads to the crucial question, doesn't it? What on earth could possibly cause a being like that to fall? Well, the answer is tucked away inside this ancient prophecy.
To really get this, we have to look at how the prophecy in Ezekiel is structured. It's so clever. The prophet is told to speak to two different figures. First, a human ruler, the prince of Tyre, and second, the invisible spiritual power behind him, the king of Tyre. It's this amazing prophetic parallel.
So the prince of Tyre, he was a real guy, Ithobal II. He was a ruler so rich and so powerful that his ego got the best of him, and he actually declared himself a god. But here's the twist. The prophecy looks right past the man on the throne to the unseen force that was influencing him, the true king of Tyre, Satan himself, who, it turns out, fell for the exact same reason.
So what's the connection? What links this arrogant human king to this magnificent celestial being? It all boils down to one thing: pride. The same pride that corrupted the man was just a mirror reflecting the original pride that caused the fall of the angelic king. And that right there, that's the key that unlocks this entire passage.
Okay, so now that we have that key, let's use it to open the door and look at who this being was before the fall. The prophecy paints this stunning picture of God's masterpiece, a being described in the most glorious terms imaginable. It's truly a portrait of absolute perfection.
Now, here's a really fascinating phrase the text uses. You seal up the sum. The source material explains this means he completely filled up God's creative pattern. Think of it like this. If God had a blueprint for creating the most wise and beautiful being possible, this cherub was the final, signed-off version. The project was complete. He was it.
And his original resume was just staggering. First, he had supreme wisdom, the wisest of any created being. Second, he had perfect beauty. Third, he held the highest rank you could imagine. He was the anointed cherub, or the arch-cherub, which gave him authority over even the highest order of angels. And finally, his job? His high office was to be the guardian, the covering cherub over the very throne of God.
And where he lived was just as incredible. He had two homes, or abodes. The first was the holy mountain of God, which is symbolic language for the very throne room of God itself. And his second home was a mineral Eden on the original earth. Get this, a garden made not of plants, but of shimmering precious gems and what the text calls stones of fire. I mean, can you even imagine?
So, you have this perfect being in a perfect environment with a perfect job. How does it all go so terribly wrong? The story now makes a hard pivot from creation to corruption, and it details exactly how the most magnificent creature in the universe became its very first sinner. The answer is laid out right here in the scripture. Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. It all started inside him. He stopped looking at the God who is the source of his beauty and instead became completely consumed by his own reflection. His own brightness corrupted his wisdom. Pride was the original sin.
And that pride kicked off a four-step spiral downward. First, his heart was lifted up. That was the internal corruption. Second, this pride led to what the text calls unrighteous traffic, his external actions. Third, this trafficking filled him with violence, which led to open rebellion. And fourth, he sinned. He missed the mark of his high calling completely.
So that unrighteous traffic, what was that? It wasn't just a bad thought. It was a cosmic smear campaign. The source explains that he went from angel to angel, slandering God, creating the very first lie. And he was so persuasive, using his now corrupted wisdom, that he convinced a full one-third of the entire angelic host to join him in his rebellion.
Of course, the rebellion failed. The consequences were immediate, and they were catastrophic. But his story doesn't end there. So let's take a look at where this fallen guardian is right now, and maybe more importantly, what power he still holds. His judgment was swift and severe. He was cast out as profane from the mountain of God. That word means he was no longer sacred, he was common.
He lost his access, he lost his position, and he lost his sacred office as the guardian of the divine throne. The perfect cherub had become the profane one.
This timeline does a fantastic job of showing his cosmic journey through 6 different homes. You can see he began in the highest places imaginable, first the throne of God, and second that mineral Eden. After his fall, he was cast down to his third and current home, the atmospheric heavens around us. But the prophecy also maps out his future. He's on a downward trajectory, first to the earth, then to the abyss, and finally to his eternal destination in the lake of fire.
Now, despite being a fallen being, don't make the mistake of thinking he's powerless. He still holds a lot of usurped power. After humanity's fall in the garden, he became the prince of this world and the god of this age. He now uses that incredible, God-given intelligence, now totally corrupted by sin, for evil, fighting a war he literally cannot win.
And that brings us to the final act of this cosmic drama. His future is already written, and it is an unwinnable war. But the story doesn't just end with his doom. It also reveals the path of escape from his influence for us. The source material lays out 3 final judgments that are still waiting for him. First, in the middle of a future period called the tribulation, he'll be cast down from the heavens to the earth. Second, for the 1,000-year millennium, he'll be locked away in a prison called the abyss. And third, his final, eternal destination, the lake of fire.
Okay, so this all raises a really personal question, doesn't it? If this incredibly powerful, super intelligent being is the god of this age, and he's actively working against humanity, how can any of us possibly escape his influence?
Well, according to the source, the answer lies in fixing what his sin originally broke. His rebellion didn't just affect him, it profaned the very sanctuaries of heaven. The text explains that those heavenly places required cleansing, and that cleansing was accomplished by the blood of the Messiah.
And this provides the ultimate hope and defense against him. Believers are not left to fight this cosmic battle on their own. As the Apostle John put it so perfectly, "Greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world."
And that's really the crucial point at the end of all this. The story that began with creation's most perfect being doesn't have to end in tragedy. For us, it finds its resolution in redemption. It's about a transfer of authority, moving from the kingdom of the fallen king and being brought into the eternal peace and safety of the true king.